Great to have you, man. How are you?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is a huge day, obviously, for a lot of LSU guys working out for Pro Day. But earlier this week, the Saints had big news, and it was confusing. Not necessarily confusing, but just the amount of the trade. If you could you break down to us kind of what happened between Philadelphia and New Orleans earlier this week?
Well, from the Saints' point of view, I think there's a couple ways to look at this. The first one is they do kind of have an aging core, and you got guys like Demario Davis and Cam Jordan in the 2017 draft class. Now, all those guys are in their second contract. So I think for this team, where they're at, they're kind of like in a reload. I wouldn't say it's a rebuild, but bringing those assets up from 2014, 2013, and kind of putting it to where they can have a younger core coming around the 2017 draft class, and then those guys around Cam Jordan, Demario Davis. It allows you to start that reload without having to wait to a point where now Demario Davis is a certain age, and these guys that are coming in can help them, and they can start to rebuild that core at a cost-effective way. The main thing here is that the Saints aren't in this place anymore where they're trying to go all in, spend every single dollar to get Drew Brees at that Super Bowl. And for this team, they'll hold on to their $20 million, $25 million in cap space because it doesn't make sense to put every dollar in. But at the same time, they still think they can make the playoffs, be a 10-win team or something like that, and you get in there and maybe you get lucky. So I think this is just a cost-effective way to kind of start that reload, be all in still to a certain degree, but not all in to a point where it's financially irresponsible.
When you think of now the draft capital they have, especially in the front end in the first round, and this specific roster, where do you immediately look?
So, two schools of thought. I mean, there's three holes. You got a need at safety, wide receiver, and offensive tackle. There's three picks in the top 50. So you can address all those things. Or secondly, if you look at every draft chart, the two picks they have, 16 and 19, you put them together, 1,850 points of trade value on the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, which is what teams kind of look at. Pick three is worth 1,800 points. So they can go all the way up to three. You're looking at maybe Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, an offensive tackle. But I think more likely they're probably just going to draft their starters. The wide receiver market's out of control. Guys are getting paid, $25, $30 million at that position now. So you got to draft them. I mean, you can't really afford to pay these guys. They aren't out there. You don't want to pay Will Fuller $15 million a year. So what are you going to do? You got to find a way to draft one. So I think that's probably what they're thinking right now.
Tyrann Mathieu was at the facility yesterday, spent some time around the New Orleans Saints facility and coaching staff. What did you learn about the day with Mathieu with the inside New Orleans?
So I think this was more of a get to know you. I think both parties going in kind of knew that there wasn't going to be a contract signed yesterday. I think Tyrann's looking for an amount of money that he's not finding quite just yet. He probably will eventually get it, especially if he's patient and willing to wait for training camp. Someone gets hurt somewhere and all of a sudden got to have our guy and he's your guy. So I think he's smart enough to know that what his value is, what it's going to take to get it, and he's going to wait until he has that leverage. But it sounded like it was a good visit. Met with Dennis Allen, Mickey Loomis, the co-defensive coordinators, toured the facility, got some gear for his kids.
Yeah.
Like it was a good visit, but I don't think it was the intent on either side was to strike a deal.
What have you made of the moves that they've made at safety, or specifically defensively, specifically safety position, bringing Marcus May and those guys in? What have you made of them trying to fill those holes left behind by Williams?
So I think they look at Marcus May as a strong safety. I think he's the Malcolm Jenkins replacement. I think they're still looking for that free safety type, more of a rangy guy. May can do some of it. Ideally, what they'd like to do is get a Marcus May and then another Marcus May type player, so you have kind of that interchangeability where one guy can be free, one guy can be strong, and you don't know on each snap who's going deep and who's coming down into the box. That's how Dennis Allen likes to play. They tried to do some of that with Marcus Williams, and he was getting better playing forward, coming in the box. His tackling was getting better. But I think ideally that's how they would like that configuration to work. So there's still work to do there. Bringing P.J. Williams in at least takes the edge off it, but I don't think they want him to be a starter. So I think the search continues. I think that's still a huge need for the team.
You and I have talked about this a little bit, but now that things are trending in the direction of the draft, and now you're seeing pro days and people starting to analyze where they're going in the draft, are you starting to learn kind of the structure and the strategy of how the Saints are going to operate post Sean Payton and without him kind of in the mix?
So I think this is kind of more Mickey Loomis's show now. I think you can kind of feel him taking a little bit more control over everything in the draft. It's going to be probably more Jeff Ireland driven. I think Dennis Allen's is going to have a big voice, but just comparatively speaking to Sean Payton, I mean, nobody I don't think will ever carry that same kind of weight again. If Dennis Allen has tremendous success, sure. I mean, but that's going to have to be earned, and it was probably earned by Sean over time too. So I think it's kind of more back to being like a truly collaborative, three-pronged approach. Mickey Loomis has final say, whereas I think, they tell you Mickey had final say before, but I think we all kind of know
right.
Sean Payton.
Until Sean Payton says, I have final say.
Yeah.
Reed Rule, Ask Nick, hashtag Ask Nick, could one of the first-round picks be enough to get DK Metcalf, or is that too expensive?
I mean, theoretically, you could possibly trade for him. I think that they would probably prefer to draft a younger player, cost control, not have to give him the big contract. I think that probably makes a little more sense for them. And like I said, man, the way these guys are getting paid now, I think your best use of resources is to spread out your money at receiver and not have it all concentrated on Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, that type of player. I mean, they're game changers, but I think Mike Thomas at $20 million is kind of probably the cap of where you want that to go. And if there's limited resources, you need three good players. And if you're paying, one guy a ton of money, like the rest of your depth chart is going to look a little weak.
Do you expect Ramczyk to shift to the left side?
I don't. The plan for him is to stay on the right now. I think James Harris is going to be left tackle. I think they would like to draft somebody to replace him. But if not, I think they're comfortable with that setup. But I think they like Ramczyk on that right side. How
do they change the strategy of offensive line with the quarterback transition of Breeze to Winston? Is there a thought now of reanalyzing how you look at that spot?
It's a good question. And, I think long-term, the type of quarterback you have determines that too. And look, if we're just being honest, like Jameis Winston's on a 2-year deal worth $28 million, $14 million a year. They aren't committed to him. Like, he's the quarterback this year if they don't draft somebody that can play ahead of him. I think they're planning on him being the starter. But long-term, he's not on a 5-year deal. You aren't building the team around him at this point. So I think if he were your long-term quarterback and you want to have these plays that are longer developing going down the field, I think you approach it one way. If you're doing the precision offense, timing-based, I think you approach it another way. So I think that's still to be determined. Overall, you want good players, but I think when you start getting a little bit, who's best for this quarterback, you got to know who your starter is going to be long-term.
You covered Malcolm Jenkins for the majority of his 13-year career. He called it a career and retired earlier this week or late last week. What did you make in covering him?
Man, just a tremendous leader. Media-wise, we're going to miss him because he was honest. He was extremely blunt, and it felt like when you talked to him, you were getting the pulse of the team. And I think he served that same purpose in the locker room when guys needed to be checked, someone needed to be, put on point. I think he was the guy doing that. So I think that they're lacking that leadership in the secondary at this point. You lose two guys that have been there for a while. Marcus Williams was the guy that called everything, got everybody set up.
Yeah.
So I think the big concern early in the season is will they be organized? Will they be on the same page? The first year Malcolm came in, there was a little bit of chemistry building there, and it took a lot of time. And think about that Green Bay game early in that year, and it was just guys running free all over the place. So they need to they got a lot of work to do in the back end of that defense. And I think if there's one thing that can turn this team from 10 wins to 8 or 7, I think it's disorganization in the secondary. So I think there's a lot to do there. They're going to start that process. Marcus May is going to be suspended, so I think it's going to be probably a 5-6 week transitionary period until everybody's kind of on point.
They brought Shy Tuttle back a couple of weeks back on the defensive line. That seems like a sneaky good group that we may not be talking about as far as like being able to have a real impact on the league.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think they've done a good job of adding depth just across that defensive line. Just very quietly, Taco Charlton came in. That's a good signing for him. They've added a few guys that I think the depth there is going to be a lot better than it was last year. As you mentioned, Shy Tuttle. I think having Tano Passanio healthy is going to be a big thing for them. And the other thing, people forget that Peyton Turner's on this team, and I know he has a lot to prove. We don't really know enough about him yet, but he was starting to show signs of it last year before getting hurt. If he can take his knowledge, match it with the physical ability, come back year 2, I mean, they might have some really impactful players on that line.
Torque Lewis, hashtag Ask Nick. Nick, do you think the Saints are done moving around picks?
That's the great question, and the timing of this. It makes it so interesting. You usually don't see these deals until they're closer to the draft. So doing it now kind of suggests to me that the Saints at least want the flexibility to explore what else is out there and make those calls. And, hey, what would 16 and 19 would, how can we move around? So I would, man, that's a tough one. Like my natural thought process is they're going to make 3 picks, but I could definitely see him moving up for Kenny Pickett. It's somebody that I know. I know Sean Payton really liked Kenny Pickett. Now, does everybody think the same as Sean Payton? That's kind of the big question here. But these guys being together, Sean likes a guy. It leads me to believe that other people in the building might like a guy as well.
Peyton's probably going to call the war room on draft day.
That's what I'm saying. There's no way we're about to be a Jerry West winning
still
time.
There.
Yeah,
Pickett's still there.
Y'all know Pickett's still out there.
I'm just telling y'all, Pickett's still available
if I were in the room.
Cordell Music, hashtag Ask Nick. Nick, do you think New Orleans needs to draft Alvin Kamara backup in the case that he could be suspended?
I think absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a big need for him. I don't think Tony Jones is the guy that they were hoping he was going to be. He had a really good preseason, but getting into the season, I think you saw some issues there. Solid depth, but not really the guy you want leading the charge. Mark Ingram could carry some of that load, but I think just getting a younger player in there, get them in the pipeline. If Alvin misses 4 games, I mean, it's a huge need. So I think it's something that they definitely need to address.
Jeff Pizzo, hashtag Ask Nick. Tuttle and Onyemata going into their last year of contracts. Nick, do you believe that they could spend those first-round picks on offensive tackle and defensive tackle?
That's a good question. I mean, OT, I think, is definitely in play. I don't think they're the way this team is set up right now, they haven't addressed their needs, and I think that's a big issue right now. You go into the draft, and you do need an OT. You need a safety. You need a wide receiver. That's why I think signing Tyrann will be a really good move for him, because you open that up then. And now if you're in the second round, 49, and say Sam Howell's there, who they went to his pro day, who they worked out privately, who they've met with another time, and you actually like him, you aren't sitting there weighing the cost between, do I have to get my starting safety, or can I take this quarterback I like who might develop? So just taking one of those off, I think, opens up the possibilities for at least taking best player available at one of those spots.
You don't have the LSU frame of reference. You weren't living in South Louisiana when Mathieu played for LSU. You have covered him in the league. You live in New Orleans now. Could you imagine what that would be like if they signed him?
Look, they treated Quan Alexander like he was Brian Urlacher, all right? Like, if Honey Badger's on this team, like, he will be treated like the greatest football player to ever live. Like, it doesn't even matter how he plays. He would be a god among, like...
Give him number 9.
Yeah. Taysom would have to lose that jersey.
No doubt about it. He would have to.
Yeah.
Nick Underhill joining us here, and we had a great comment, Nick, come in from one of our listeners talking about 2 trailblazers in the media industry that I'm watching right now. Keep up the great work, fellas. I respect the entrepreneurial approach, and I'm happy to see it paying off for the both of you. Thank you for watching. How has it been over at New Orleans Football? You are our resource for Saints information. I know when we promote and talk about your information, when we're talking about Saints, you can see the trust that people have in your site and in your info. So, for people like us who are out on our own, basing on our relationships within the industry to keep us thriving, what has it been on your focused approach to the Saints, where we're more in the sports talk realm?
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing is that I'm a little surprised that, like, more people aren't doing this. Honestly, I think
don't you get calls and texts though of how did we get there?
I do, and then nobody ever, they get to the edge and they don't jump. And the thing is that I think you use the people that you need to use to build up your platform. But at a certain point, we're all marketing our own content. At a certain point, ESPN has helped you to a certain point, and beyond that, it's about the people on there. And I think when you build that relationship with your readers, your listeners, they have trust in you. They know the information's good. They know you're going to be working, for their support. And when they give you your support, that's going to be in the forefront of your mind. And you learn them and you give them the content that they enjoy and they want to digest. And, it's been rewarding, honestly. I mean, the way this goes, to feel the support from the city, the state, I mean, that's a driving thing. And then just also to be able to figure this out and not have to worry about some guy in an office deciding, hey, you know what, like, we got to cut back here and this guy makes too much money, or, whatever the reason is, to kind of take control of your destiny and to know that you can be there and grow something and build something and do it in the voice of the people that are digesting your content.
New Orleans Football is a great podcast. a great website at NewOrleans.football, obviously, and then the YouTube channel that you need to subscribe and keep up with the information on is all available to you, the listener, and their social media channels that you can find all over the place. Nick Underhill is our guy that we get the New Orleans Saints information from. Make sure and get that subscription today. Who are you watching? Stingley is the headliner today that I think everybody is showing up. He's the one that's on the marquee, but 17 guys going through the action today.
Yeah, he's one. I know they got a couple guys earmarked that they're going to be watching up here, and I don't have them on the forefront. I'd have to glance at my phone to kind of get those names. But there's 3 or 4 guys that they're watching here. I know they are looking at cornerbacks. The Saints are the guy
Cardell
from
Flott.
Yeah, the guy from Clemson that's supposed to go mid-first round. They just had him in for a visit. So, I mean, it's definitely a possibility for them, even with Paulson Adebo. I mean, their eyes are still open. They're doing their homework there. So, he's definitely one of the. I think there's 3 or 4 guys that they're looking at here.
We will be over there all day. Nick will be over there covering it, obviously, for NewOrleans.football. Keep up with the latest to see what the Saints learned today about the 17 prospects that are working out over at LSU. Obviously, keep up with our social media as we'll be putting out video this morning from being there on campus as well, and kind of going through. This will be Brian Kelly's first pro day on campus for LSU, and see how that is handled. What's the NFL schedule like right now, Nick? I mean, everything going into draft, and then soon after the draft, like within a couple of days of the draft, you're in rookie minicamp, right?
All right, let me catch up real quick. Stingley, Flott, Clark, those are the guys on defense.
So Damone Clark and Cardell Flott outside of Stingley, obviously.
And then Ingram and Austin, I'm going to say the name wrong.
Deculus.
There you go.
DeCalculus.
Ed Ingram and Austin Deculus, so 2 offensive linemen.
Yeah, so those are the guys that kind of got earmarked today to look at them. The schedule for the NFL draft coming up, and then after that, man, I can't believe it's April already. It's into camps right after that. OTAs, all that stuff. So yeah, it's moving incredibly fast. The league just has set it up so it's like there's like nonstop action.
Dead space. Yeah, there's no dead space.
So real quick, you mentioned Stingley on that list for LSU and maybe the Saints' little mutual interest. They've already made a trade. Was there any way that, assuming Stingley doesn't pop on the pro day, which we all think he will, but would the Saints be interested in moving up, or even if he does pop, would they move up and maybe take a stab at Stingley top 10 inside the top 10 if he were to fall?
I'd be surprised if they moved up for corner just because I don't feel like it's a pressing need. But I think they're just kind of positioned in a spot where if like some stuff falls to them, they'll do it. But like again, like I mentioned before, it's just if they were to sign Tyrann, like you're suddenly your options are open and it's not like, okay, we got corners, but who's playing safety? You could always sign them, after the draft. It doesn't seem like that's necessarily something that has to happen quickly. But I'm sure they're gonna have an eye on it. And if he starts taking visits, maybe that kind of changes the calculus a little bit.
Did you get an idea where they are on the business side? How if they are far off on money, how much he's asking for and how much they can offer?
It seems like there's a
gap.
It just kind of seemed like it didn't even really go too far there. I mean,
Thanks for the gear.
Yeah,
he was in and out of there in like 90 minutes. I don't think it was anything where they were like negotiating. And the feel I got is that the money's
needs to tighten up.
Yeah, it's a little bit too far off at this point. I think he's looking probably for like Marcus Williams range money, and they're obviously not spending that at that position.
NewOrleans.football. Check out the site today. Make sure and subscribe if you want the latest on New Orleans Saints news. You hear Nick every week during the season here.